Okay, just a second to get set up. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Everyone can see the screen. Let me just adjust. Okay, perfect. Everyone can hear. Okay, so welcome to our first episode of Get Better at Harmony. This is a series where I'm going to start correcting people's homework. So we have our series, How to Voice Preposition Chords. This is a series for composers and performers who want to get serious about harmony. I had to move to France to get proper training in harmony. I did a master's and a bachelor's here in America for music composition. And though I had a lot of opportunities to compose music and get my music performed, I never had real quality instruction in harmony. Unfortunately, in America, a lot of times harmony is, getting a Bach chorale and trying to compose above and below and having passing tones. And it's incredibly complex because you have suspensions, passing tones, you have modulations, and it's a nice way to get started, but it's really not the final piece of the puzzle. And if you've ever had the experience where you try to orchestrate or you try to do fugue and you're completely lost, despite like decades of training or professional training, then what I would like to suggest is that the solution is to get a proper training in harmony. So in the French style, we are composing above and below or writing below. Above and below. So this exercise that you see here, it's our F major exercise from season one of how to voice reposition chords. And you'll see that the bass here is what was provided. And then we had to listen for the soprano, test the middle voices, and ultimately realize the entire exercise. So this is our first qualified submission of the year. And though technically 2025 is basically almost over, I wanted to fit it in, uh, to celebrate. Okay, so here is a submission. And the first thing I want to mention about submitting your work, okay, is you have to make sure that you've done your job. What does your job mean? Okay. Doing your job means making sure you've done everything in your control that you got the best possible result. You cannot afford to outsource your brain. And especially if you're someone you're done with college, done with university, and you want to get better at harmony, but you don't have the time to go to France like I did and commit, or you just can't fit it in, but you want to work on it a couple hours a week, it's the bare minimum required for harmony, then you have to take ownership. So one of the things I require that I mentioned here is make sure the exercise is correctly copied down. Okay. Make sure that's complete. So either you're going to figure out the outer voice or you're going to realize all four voices. I cannot look at the exercise if it is not complete. Otherwise, I'm looking at uni skis, as it's in French, means I'm looking at the kind of draft. Okay. And I can only be of assistance if I get your best possible, meaning there's almost strain. Like you get to that point, like, I can't. Like you just get to the point, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. Okay. But one of the things you definitely have to do is make sure that there are no parallel fifths and no parallel octaves, as well as deceptive cadences properly voiced. Because those are things that it's just a matter of attention to detail. There's not some special skill that needs to be learned. So when I got the submission, that's one of the first things I checked for. And I saw no issues, so I was able to continue. Quick notice, if you want to do these exercises, a reminder, I know many of you know this, we have a website, barnesandmusic.com/fundamentals of harmony, and you'll find this exercise as well as the new exercises. Okay, so first we're going to start with the errors, okay? I just want to let everyone know that this is a French style of learning. So we're not going to be worried about people's feelings and like, oh, we got to say it nicely, do a compliment first. No, okay? The beauty of the French tradition is that when it comes to music, it's like a science. Okay, it's balanced or it's not balanced. It doesn't work or doesn't work. The key change is successful or it doesn't. Murky key change versus a clear key change. Okay, so we're going to keep this esprit, as we call it in French. I'm just going to look at it as it is. There's no need to feel personally attacked. I'm just going to say what works and what doesn't work. Okay. All right. So first, we're going to start with verifying the exercise, just the basics of the exercise. Okay. So as you can see here, I rewrote the exercise. Why would I do that? You got a submission that was printed. Yes. But part of how we learn is we craft it with our hands. I think music can often be a very physical experience. Okay. You just notice a lot more details when you do by hand. I understand, the computer is super fancy and quick and you feel secure and you feel safe. But safety is a tyranny when it comes to harmony. Okay. You have to put yourself at risk. And one of the ways you do that is you put in the extra work and you do it by hand. So I rewrote this by hand. And the first thing I verified that there was no mistake in copying down the exercise. That sounds a little ridiculous. Like it's like, of course. Okay. But the reality is that will get you at some point. And if you copy down the exercise incorrectly, even one note, the whole thing is invalid. Okay, I cannot review it. I can't make decisions because it's kind of like a contrapuntal exercise, right? When you do counterpoint and there's a parallel fifths, it's over. The whole thing is over. Okay, so I verified that the exercise was correct and it was correct. Now, one of the first things we do is we do a quick analysis of the exercise. This is in order to save time. Okay, now let me get my pitches from my piano real quick. Fa, fa, do. Okay, I'll just quickly hum through the melody. Fa, do, fa, si, do, re, do, fa, la, si, do, fa, si, do, la, si, sol, do, fa. Okay, now I just kind of rush through it, but you need to play through it a couple times, play on the piano, play on an instrument, but you want to hear what's natural in the music because harmony is a study of what is natural. So, as we can see here, we have phrases. So, da 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 da. Okay. Then you have a little small phrase, da da da. Then we have another phrase, da 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 da. Okay. So those are the elemental things that you're going to need to do. This is especially important, right, when you do orchestration, because many times with orchestration, we have to orchestrate at the phrase. We have to see the different phrases because we may want different orchestration for the different phrases depending on how long they are. So harmony prepares you for orchestration fugue. Now notice I indicated in green the types of cadences, okay? So we end with a perfect authentic cadence. And if you're unfamiliar with these cadences, it won't take very long to get a superficial understanding, but the real understanding is doing harmony in the French style. Okay, but check our YouTube shorts for explanations on this. Okay, so we have the perfect authentic cadence, which is only for ending a piece. Okay, you can't put it prior. Here we have a half cadence, so we're ending on a five. And then here, the first phrase ends with an imperfect authentic cadence. What that means is it's a 5-1, but we don't want to stop the piece completely. So instead of putting the tonic in the soprano, we're going to put the third or the fifth. Okay? Finally, we have the Roman numerals. Okay, the Roman numerals are essential because you want to quickly see the function. Okay, we don't have time to waste. If you're going in the French conservatory system, you would have, the what we call it, gratuit. Okay, so it's usually low cost or free to go to conservatory, and you have lots of years to kill, and you can take your time. But here, this is urgent. On est pressé, as we say in French. Okay, and you need to just see. You have to see like you're a military general. You need to see the entire battlefield, okay? So we see the Roman numerals. Now, quick note about the French way of learning harmony. In the French method, we do not distinguish between minor and major for the Roman numeral analysis, usually, okay? I understand definitely growing up from the American tradition, we had to. I think we borrow from Germany, I don't know. But there is a tyranny in precision. Okay. So kind of like, those some schools use 12-note solfege, that's ridiculous. Okay. When you are so focused on getting exactness in every detail, you completely lose the larger picture. So the beauty of the French tradition is because with the Roman numerals, we're just focused on knowing the function. So it's all capital, right? See the deceptive cadence here, it's a 5 to 6, and the 6 is going to be minor. But we keep it all capital because it allows us to focus on the larger structure. So I guess I never mentioned this, but going forward, when you do your analysis, if you submit the analysis with the homework, then make sure that the Roman numerals are always capital. All right, so now we're going to go to the outer voices. What that means is soprano and bass. So the first thing I'm looking at are the relationships between the two. And I see A, B, C, and D. This corresponds with a 5 to 1. So we have a 5 to 1 here, 5 to 1 here, 5 to 1 here, and then 5 to 1 here. A 5 to 1 is a very precarious moment in harmony because if you don't voice it correctly, it could end the piece, or it may not sufficiently end the piece. Okay, so you have to be super, super careful. Also, got to be careful of parallels at the 5 to 1. Okay, so the first instance here, notice that the soprano gets to an F, and we're in F major, and the bass gets to an F, and we're in F major. So F is a tonic. That is unacceptable. It stops the piece. The piece is over. It's done. It's over. Okay. Even if it's not a 5 to 1, some kind of other progression, but you get to a 1, but the tonic is in the soprano and the bass, it stops the piece. Now, obviously, the musicians will keep going, but it's really distracting, and it's you can't do it. Okay. Luckily, this is something, if I just say it once, most people, if you make the intention, you just won't do it again. And then a couple of years from now, when you have a sharper ear, you'll notice just on, oh yeah, he's right. Like it really kills the piece. Okay. So no putting the tonic in the soprano for a 1 chord in the middle of an exercise. No exceptions. Well, when we get to modulations, it'll be a little different, but no. Okay. B and C are fine. So notice here we have a 5 to 1, but notice that the soprano has the A, which is the third. Excellent. Okay. Again, here we get to the the 1 with an A in the soprano, so the third. Excellent. Okay. So here the composer was very, or maybe just it happened to be where the lines took him, but I'm assuming the composer was very sensitive. It's also important because here is an actual cadence. So if there had been the tonic in the soprano here, it would just, the whole piece is over. Okay. But this still is a problem here. Finally, at the end, we have something that is just maybe I wasn't clear, but this is root position chords. So he has a 6/4, which is common, for an ending to do second inversion, but we're doing root position chords, so it's not acceptable. So that's just an easy fix to do. Okay. Other precarious moments are when the bass moves by step. What happens when the bass moves by step? When the bass moves by step, there is such a high risk danger for parallel fifths or parallel octaves. One of the most beautiful things about the French way of learning harmony is they make it super simple. So one of the first things I learned with reposition chords is when the bass moves by step, the other voices move in opposite direction. When you move in opposite direction, you immediately avoid the risk of parallels. And this was funny to me because, living in America and trying to do these Bach chorales and just feeling so difficult, and just every beat you're stressing, okay, I got to make sure no parallel fifths and no octaves. But if I'd only had, someone schooled in the French tradition that could have just told me, hey, move in opposite direction when the voice moves by step, I could have alleviated a lot of brain space and focus on bigger things like the modulations and the baccarat. So this is again another beauty of the French tradition. Okay, so we see the bass moves by step here. Okay, 4, 5, 6, back to 5. Here as well, 3, 4, 5, and here 3 to 4. Again, another reason why we take the time to read the Roman numerals because it just allows us to free up brain space for like harder decisions and we don't make mistakes. Okay. All right, so he did a very good job here. We have no issues. So I put the pink to make a separation, not to indicate an error here, which sometimes I do use pink for. So here, notice that the bass is rising, si, do, re, okay? Now notice that we have a soprano, fa, mi, fa. It is moving in the same direction, but that's for the exception of the leading tone, right? So when the bass moves by step, the other voice is going to move in the opposite direction. But when it's the deceptive cadence in particular, we're going to have that leading tone. We're going to resolve the leading tone up, but the other voices have to move in opposite direction. That's how we avoid problems, okay? B as well, we have do, si, so, okay, and the bass rises up to that, okay? Likewise here in C, when the bass goes up, the soprano goes down, okay? This is excellent, okay? And what this means is that we have just a baseline that is sturdy that we can work with. Because if you're having, those are the things that should be easy to integrate. Bass moves by step, move in opposite direction. This is a really good sign. Another precarious moment would be the deceptive cadence. And the deceptive cadence is a stepwise progression. So technically, I guess it could fall into the rules about bass with my step. But I do think the deceptive cadence is important because it is the first substitute for the perfect authentic cadence, and you're going to go to it a lot, especially when you do fugue. If you don't want to kill the motion, you don't want to kill a section just yet, you're going to have to do deceptive cadence at some point. So we have to master it very quickly. And it's one of the reasons why I require when you submit the work that you have verified that you properly voice deceptive cadence because the more responsibility you take on your end, the better I can be to focus on higher level problems so that you can get ready for orchestration, get ready for fugue much quicker. Okay, so here we see excellence. Okay, so the leading tone, we're at F major, so the leading tone is the E natural, goes up to the F, and other voices move in opposite direction. Okay, so the C in the alto jumps to the A, and the G in the tenor goes down to F. Good. Okay, so to conclude this part here, I would say in terms of the bass soprano relationship, which is really, really important. Why is this important? When you get to orchestration and you're going to orchestrate like a tutti passage, okay, let's say you focus on the strings, or you're going to design the ambitus between the outer voices. So you're going to get the double bass and you're going to get the first violins. What's their distance? What's their relationship? Well, this obviously comes from harmony. Likewise, when fugue, though we do have the subject and the counter subject often passing between different voices, nevertheless, the listener ear is still going to be primed to notice what's on the top register. So even though we do have a subject and counter subject that technically takes precedence, we're still going to have to be cognizant of what is going on in the highest voice, the soprano, in relationship to the bass. And this, of course, all comes from harmony. So, what I can say about the relationship of bass to soprano, I don't see any existential problems. The only thing that is slightly concerning is that he had this tonic one chord voice with an ace, right? An octave between the other voices, which kills the piece. And it's something that has to be immediate. So now that I point it out, it can never, ever, ever, ever happen again. This is something that's very easy. It's much different from some other things I'm going to point out later. But this is something that's okay. I didn't realize. Boom, and you own it. That's how you get better at harmony without a teacher. Otherwise, what I think there's a danger sometimes when we're students is that we get lazy because the teacher's there to figure it out for us. But if we don't hustle and do everything I can to figure it out, as if maybe we're never going to have a teacher again, then I feel like we might be wasting our time. Okay, so this is excellent. Okay, so far. All right, so let's look at some solutions. Okay. All right, so the first thing we want to fix the soprano. So remember that soprano I just pointed out here, it got to the F, and so it closed the motion. Well, obviously the solution is just to put it back to the third. Notice how I highlighted or I circled when I wrote this out. We have an opening position here. And then 3 beats later, we get to this, or 2 beats later, we get to the same position, right? So the bass is doing fa, do, fa. So it would be logical that the position of the soprano would be identical. Obviously, this is not going to last forever in the piece, but how far could we really have gone with soprano this quickly? Okay. One other thing I just want to mention in the notes here is focus on finding what is natural and simple. Okay. So harmony is not about individual expression. Okay. You're becoming the whole here. Now, the benefit, of course, is then when you do composition, then when you do orchestration, then when you do fugue, you have liberation, you have closer to liberation, you have the freedom, you just can achieve things that you weren't capable of. So this kind of straitjacket that we put on is not forever. And be really careful about mixing harmony and fugue, okay, or harmony studies and orchestration, because many times you're going to misapply what you're learning. So better just to put it, forget about it, and just let the work you're doing just take over your subconscious. Okay, so now we got to talk about something really, really important. And I'm really glad that we have a submission because now I can see what are some common problems that you guys might be experiencing. Because since I have a good level in harmony, there's certain things I just don't think of. Okay, I try to my best to anticipate what are the traps or the pièges, as we call it in French, the piège, the traps that you'll fall into. But until I get someone's work to correct, I won't know. And this is something that we can all benefit from. Okay, so we got to talk about passing tones. Okay, passing tones are not allowed at this stage. Okay, we're doing root position chords. It's just the chords. Okay, in the Henri Chalon book series, which is the model book series that I use, he starts first with reposition chords. Actually all the French schools do that way. Then he brings in first inversion, then he brings in second version, and petit à petit, it's in French, little by little, he builds up. And eventually he ends with passing tones. If you were to study this in France, you probably wouldn't even make it all the way there because you would get on to more advanced studies in orchestration and fugue, and I don't think it's necessary to integrate passing tones into basic harmony. Okay. But nevertheless, there is a difference between passing tones and a change of harmony. And one of the reasons we take out passing tones, we take out suspensions, we take out everything is we want to see where you are. The beauty of the French tradition is everything's exposed. We see everything, everything, everything. And that allows the teacher to very quickly, we say in French, cibler. They can target, okay, this must be fixed. Here is a weakness here. And so that you can get better much quicker. Okay. Again, in the French tradition, it's just very much like a science. Okay, this works, this doesn't work. And your progress shoots up because it takes all the interpretation out of it. Okay. Now, some schools do bring passing tones sooner, and I do have an announcement at the end about what I'm doing to make this course more adaptable for harmony orchestration because it does give you a really good base. But I understand for some of you, it can be frustrating just the bare bones, but hey, it's necessary. But I do have a solution that I've been thinking of that I'll mention at the end of the video. Okay, so there's a difference between passing tones and changes of harmony. So first off, in the yellow here, A, These passing tones are not utilized correctly. So notice how the alto goes to the E, which is the leading tone. It doesn't resolve and then jumps to the C. This has a very, I hate to say mediocre effect, but that's actually how it's going to sound. It's imagine once you activate the leading tone, you have to imagine it's like you see someone beautiful at the bar, right? Dressed very provocatively, and they tease you, and then they just suddenly leave. That's the effect of activating the leading tone and not resolving it. There are times we don't resolve it, but in this case, it's just not effective use of passing tones. Plus, it's technically not passing tones because more like a note échappé with say in French. And likewise with the tenor, this kind of like mi fa so fa. It's just kind of meandery and it doesn't do much for the music. So again, the reason we don't do passing tones just yet is because it adds complication and we can't focus on the essence. Okay. If you focus on the essence and you just commit yourself to it, the passing tones become very logical after some time. Like you won't actually need to do a separate study for it. Okay. So we gotta take no passing tones, okay? Or neighbor tones. In the purple or the pink here, we have a major problem. Okay. And this is great that we have a submission so we can talk about it. So in this piece, the harmony is moving by the quarter note. Okay. Sometimes we have a hold here, like a half note for a cadence, but in general, it's moving by the quarter note. So the harmonic motion, the rate of change. Okay. Think about like in the world, we move day by day. That's how time moves or year by year. But in this piece of music, time moves quarter by quarter. So because of that, sorry, here in this pink, when we have this chord, it's a one chord, F, F, C, A, and then beat two, F, F, D, A. We don't have a passing tone. This is a change of harmony. I know that may seem really subtle and specific. It is not. It is primordial. Because one of the goals of this study is to expose weaknesses or deficiencies in our mastery of harmony, in our ability to hear harmony. And that's what I can see right here. You're not able to hear to see that this is not a passing tone. This is an actual change of harmony, and we can't allow it. Okay. All right. So don't be upset about making mistakes. This is great. So now I can see, okay, this is another issue that I have to address in my course that I'm building. All right. So now that's something I admit it takes time to master. Okay. The correction I gave prior about the octave on the tonic, that is immediate. But recognizing the harmonic pacing is going to take repetition. Okay. So just keep doing the exercises. But this for me is the first big concern. Okay. It's the first big concern. Now in the green, we have what is just probably a very simple accident. If you actually look at the harmony here, we have A, and then this tenor note was tied over. So we have A, F, so it's already a six against the bass. So that's not a root position chord. E, C. No biggie, okay. But this is what happens when you tie notes over like that. So what I recommend doing is to not do that because then you miss the details, which will show in the next slide. So just to make this clearer, okay, we have a change in harmony, right? In B. Okay, we have F, F, D, A. So that's a 2/6, which is not allowed. And then for C here, we have A, F, E, C when I rewrite the notes. So like suggest doing is instead of putting whole notes, which is more aesthetic, it's nicer to look at, it's closer to actual music. Just think chord, just put the new chord every time. So there's no trick of the eye. Okay. That I'm less concerned about because I'm assuming it's just like a mental lapse. Okay, something that was really good was a change across a cadence. So let me just hesitate to go too far back, but let me go back to the original exercise. So we have a cadence here. So, la. And then notice do, si, so. He jumps to a new elevation. Okay. The phrase has ended. Let me see if I can. No, we don't see it. Okay. So the phrase has ended here. La. There'd be a natural pause. Do, si, so. Okay. So changing to a different elevation, that's excellent. Bach definitely would do that in his chorales. Let me get back to the right section. Okay, so this is a really good impulse because what we can see is this composer is able to think across a section. Okay, and definitely when it comes to orchestration, you're going to have to be able to do that. Sometimes you're going to keep the same note, especially for a key change. So we call it note commune, okay, note in common. Other times, if it's really clear harmony, you want to switch to it. That's a good opportunity, right? Imagine like you're sitting in a movie theater and you're uncomfortable. Well, let's say you're at the opera, okay, and you're uncomfortable in your seat, and there's a seat next to you, but you don't want to disrupt the performance, so maybe you wait for an opportune moment, okay, when the lights go down for a second, and then you switch your seat. That's what this effect is, okay. So this is good. Okay, now we need good voice fitting, right? So we've talked about the path of least resistance. Check out the YouTube shorts on it. I explain it. I don't know how to do any better. Okay, but basically voices need to move as little as possible. Okay, so priority is to stay in the same note. Then you move by step, and finally you have to leap. Soprano, of course, will move around a lot more because otherwise you'll have a really boring soprano line. And sometimes the inner voices are going to leap in order to regain good spacing. However, here I see two problems. Okay. I see the alto is doing a tritone leap, E to B flat. That is unacceptable. Okay. Distant leaps are not acceptable. Um, Later on, there are certain cases where it can arise, perhaps in the soprano, but for now, there's really no reason for it. Okay. When you see something like this, like these kind of wide leaps, you got to ask yourself why. Is it really necessary? Tenor as well. F to C. What that means is either you're starting on the wrong position, or you ended on the wrong position. So maybe this section sounds good. This section starts good, but il ne, il ne chante pas. I can't speak French today, but they don't connect. Okay. And I have a YouTube shorts called Voice Across a Phrase or Section. Check in the YouTube shorts where I explain this, right? You got to be really careful, okay? So this is not acceptable, but these are smaller details that I think can immediately be fixed. Immediately. I mean, the next exercise, they're not there. One other thing I want to mention is when you do your exercises, you want perfection, okay? You want to reach that point of exhaustion where I'm just like, this is the best I can possibly produce. And you may think you're there, and then you notice a small thing, ah, this can't be right. And then you're like, oh God, now I have to spend more. I'm exhausted. Well, then what you have to do is you have to schedule another 30 minutes into your schedule or 2 hours or however long it's going to take later in the week to fix the problem. Because that's how you're going to grow without a teacher. Because if I have to observe it, then I can't focus on the larger things. Okay. So make sure that when you get a correction like that, it's immediate. The thing we saw prior with the harmonic pacing, that takes time. But something like this, if you see these crazy leaps, there's got to be a problem. There's got to be a more elegant way. Okay. One other thing I want to mention. Um, okay. I think there's sometimes danger in learning Bach if we don't. I don't know. Bach is great, but with the Bach chorales, this solution is very common, right? Notice that the soprano does 2 to 1. Sol, fa, instead of mi, fa, right? And that's because Bach was using old chants, right? Chants from the Renaissance or who may be medieval, in which tension resolved by going down. This is before tonality. So then when he took those chants and he harmonized them, he basically forced tonality onto these chants that really were not conceived in that way. So in order to make it work, he had to do what we call the frustrated leading tone, where this we have a leading tone in a lower voice, the alto, that jumps down to get the fifth. So we have a complete chord, and that's resolved in the upper voice. Now, this within the exercise can occur occasionally, right? There's that one tiny exception for the septive cadence in major, but I don't want to go down that road. Just check the tutorial. But for any of the exercises, it's not acceptable. Okay. So we have the liberty now to write the chant or write the melody. Okay. And so when you end the exercise, it's got to be leading to tonic in the soprano. Has to be. Unless you have a plagal cadence, which is a 4 to 1. That's different, of course. Maybe once in a blue moon, the dot is very rare. Okay, it's always got to be leading tone to tonic. That way, you're going to have a balanced chord. So if you notice something weird like this, like a leading tone doesn't get resolved, you should question it. Okay. Now, I assume that people thought this was acceptable because we do see it in Bach chorales, but for French harmony exercise, it's not an acceptable solution because this is hypertonal, and you have the possibility of writing the soprano yourself, and the person who makes the exercise is expecting that you're going to end with a lean to the tonic. Okay, so that's another quick. Okay, I'll write it down. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. One quick note is in regards to leaps, we do have big leaps sometimes after a deceptive cadence to reestablish good spacing, but that's not the case we have here, okay? So just to make clear, yeah, like was expressing before, instead of what we saw here with the soprano doing 2 to 1, which is going to create problems, we do a 7 rising to 8. Okay, it's just much more satisfactory, very quick fix, make sure it happens, okay? Okay, now we're almost done, and I'll give my assessment. Yeah, I'll talk about orchestration and fugue. So here we have a problem. Again, no need to get defensive, but this is the beauty of the French system. It just strips away everything, and you just see the problem. So that way you iron it out in the safety of a French, harmony exercise, right? No one, it's not your own work, it's a style. Okay. So then when you do orchestration, then when you do fugue, it's so much easier. It's still really difficult, but your mind is focused on bigger tasks than like house chores, which what this is. That's basically what your harmony is basically learning like basic chores, okay, and doing them so often and learning them so well that they become automated and that you can actually focus on big stuff. That's what it is, okay? So notice here, we have a pattern in the bass. Fa, si, do, la, si, sol, do, fa. Let me try to sing it higher. Oh, fa, si, do, la, si, sol, do, fa. So we have a pattern, right? We have leap of a third, leap of a third. Now, this first leap here is a leap of a fifth, but it's the same esprit. So even though this technically is different, it's still the same. And it's important that we recognize patterns because if you see a pattern in the bass, you want to expect a pattern in soprano. And I don't see that. I see la, si, sol, do, si, do, re, la, sol, fa. So I see kind of a random soprano that seems ignorant of the bass. Okay. And that's why, and this is one of the things why you have to do harmony on a regular basis, right? Because some of the quick fixes, like don't end with the two, end with a leading to, that's easy. Okay. It can be done forever. But it just takes time of doing the exercises and seeing, oh, there's a pattern. Oh, there's a pattern. Yeah. So as we can see, I made a correction here. La, si, sol, la, fa, sol, mi, fa. Okay. So I found a good starting position. And so you have F A. Okay, so we start at F A. And then here we have C G, B flat F. Okay, so we see fifth, fifth, fifth. Okay, and likewise on the outer beats. So that is something that is a concern, but it can be fixed if you do regular harmony. So at least for those of you who are super serious, and you don't want to go to France to get a teacher or look around for a teacher, then you got to do the work. And I would suggest bare minimum is 3 hours of like quality, but probably 5 to 7 would be ideal. Okay, so orchestration and fugue. How does this apply? So, based on the work that I've seen, I will give my assessment on readiness for orchestration or fugue. Don't take it as a death sentence. It's just so that you can start actively working on these skills. I suggest continuing doing what you're doing. Don't stop orchestrating. Don't stop your fugue. Okay, because there's also a danger of just stopping and thinking you'll get to perfection and then you lose sight of composition. So it's still very different. But voice leading capabilities. I think they're generally pretty good, if not strong. Okay. Definitely pretty good. Okay. Overall, most of the time we didn't see anything crazy, right? And also don't forget this kind of revoicing across with a really good instinct. Okay, so I don't really see any problems. Okay, generally it's very functional and it works very well, but there are a couple concerns, right? We have that leading the tonic in the soprano for the five, sorry, for the one. We also have these strange leaps in the soprano, sorry, in the alto and the tenor. Either they're a result of just not spending enough time checking, you got to check afterwards, or maybe the composer got to exhaustion and just said, whatever. But make sure when you get to the point of exhaustion, if you see that it can be better, okay, you gotta like, it's so frustrating when you think you're almost done and then you're not. But that's how you get better without a teacher. And the more that you push yourself to that perfection, where can I just get it all done as much as possible so I don't have to rely on someone else? Okay. And ideally, you want to get so good that you've just like this, you're like, okay, this is the best I possibly can do. You want to push yourself to that kind of mental exhaustion. And that's how you're going to really get like deep harmony, like a real harmony. Okay. Where you can do anything, you know. Reminder, dissonant leaps, E to B flat, not acceptable. Okay, can't happen. All right, cadences. I think cadence demonstration of mastery of cadence is very good. Okay, very importantly, we had the first cadence in the piece, which is an imperfect authentic cadence, and he voiced it with the third in the soprano, so it didn't end the motion. Good. Okay, half cadence is well voiced. The ending is a little problematic, right? Which you talked about. First of all, the 6/4 can't happen, so I'm sure that won't happen again. And make sure you end up leading tone to tonic. But overall, I think cadences are good, and that's really important for orchestration because cadences are moments where there's a lot of change happening. Okay, orchestration may change. You have to get ready for a new event. And fugue, especially, cadences will mark the endings of sections. The first major red flag for me is ability to hear harmonic pacing. So, at what rate is the motion moving in a piece? This is really important with fugue because depending on the speed of your fugue, you know, you may have a change of harmony, or something may function as just passing tones, or it is really really important for fugue. Probably should do a video explaining that more. But this is something elemental, hearing the pacing of the harmony. And we saw that this change, this note here in the tenor, sorry, the alto, C to D, that's not a passing tone. That's a change in harmony. Okay. So we got to be hyper paranoid. That's what you want. You be hyper paranoid. So the next time it's like, oh my God, I can't let this happen. And then you catch it, right? You catch it. It's like you catch someone trying to steal something. You're like, gotcha. And then eventually it's so automatic, it becomes part of your subconscious and you don't have to think. And you get to think about bigger things. Ability here is sequence. That is something that has to be fixed. Okay. The only way it can honestly be fixed, I think the most practical is to do more exercises, which we're going to talk about at the end in just a couple seconds. I do have I think on my fugue page, barnjmusic.com/fugue, I think I have a modulating fugue, modulating sequence exercise. And that's good for training the subconscious, getting it in your fingers. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to write a sequence. You have to be able to recognize it by looking at it. Okay. So that is something that I only think French harmony exercises or an equivalent can adequately address. Because keep in mind, for fugue, sequences are like your transportation network between different countries. This key, how your underground tunnel, you go by plane. It's like there's no way around it. Okay. All right. So overall, I think the composer did a very good job, but there are some elemental things that have to be addressed. And again, we're not here. This is no one's personal work. This is not criticism. This is no bearing on your ability as a composer, but this is why we do the French harmony, because it exposes what needs to be fixed, and then you can actually fix it and get better. So I'm noticing a lot of people are interested in this because they want to get better harmony, want to get better orchestration fugue. And usually in for root position chords in the Henri Chalon, which is the model, he doesn't bring in modulations and sequences until book two. So we would have to do first inversion and second inversion, and then we're worthy. Okay. But I think this is actually a mistake. Okay. Definitely in a French system where you have free conservatories and you can take your time, that works well, though other schools do it differently. But I think a lot of you are still, the reality is you're working on your fugues, you're working on orchestration. Okay. So we need something more immediate. So for season two, depending on when you're watching it, you may be already watching in the year. I think here in New Jersey, it is still 2025. But for season two, we're going to stay with root position chords so we can look at the fundamentals, but I bring in sequences and modulations. So this will definitely help you for fugue, and it'll definitely really help you with orchestration because one of the big difficulties in orchestration is when you have any kind of change. Okay, so a key change or a change of section, that's where a lot of problems are going to take place. So if you want to do the work and get the corrections, just make sure you submit it on time, and you can go to barneyjmusic.com/fundamentals of harmony.